Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, anyways, I thought that I would take a look, all in all, at this little video by Dante's Boxing Nation. Anyways, we're going to take a look at this video because apparently there has been rumors about a Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte fight next year, which I wouldn't necessarily mind. I think that would be a decent fight. It wouldn't necessarily be on the top of my list of, the fighters that I would want, to see Tyson Fury face next. Of course, I want to see him face the winner of Alexander Usyk versus Anthony Joshua. But that may come a little bit later on. And on top of that, Dillian Whyte, he is the number one contender, I believe. And Tyson Fury more than likely probably is going to have to defend his title. So we'll see all in all what happens with that. It'll be very, very interesting. But anyways, Dante's Boxing Nation, of course, he was one of the guys that alleged that Deontay Wilder was going to defeat Tyson Fury in this third matchup. He was the one that was alleging a lot of these cheating allegations, etc., etc. And of course, he basically came out looking like a fool. Now, whether he did that all in all because he truly believed it or he also was just trying to get views, perhaps maybe it's a little bit of both. When it comes down to it all in all, Dante's Boxing Nation, he's now so depressed that Tyson Fury, who's a Caucasian fighter, he's now so depressed that, Tyson Fury was able to beat Deontay Wilder, now basically for the third time, that he's almost taken an approach overall to the point to where actually he pretty much has thrown Deontay Wilder under the bus, where he used to be a very, very big fan of him. Now he basically has switched sides. And he's been saying, oh, well, Deontay Wilder, he never was that complete of a fighter. And Tyson Fury, he's really not that great because he hasn't defeated anyone that good. All just to not give Tyson Fury the credit of defeating Deontay Wilder. But it is what it is. So now basically what his tactic overall is against Tyson Fury is that he's going to claim that Dillian Whyte is a more complete fighter, maybe a better fighter than Deontay Wilder. And of course, Dillian Whyte in certain areas, yes, he's a more complete fighter than Deontay Wilder. But is he more dangerous than a Deontay Wilder? I'm not sure if I would necessarily say that. We can take a look at the history. We could take a look at Muhammad Ali's era and say, you know what? I truly believe all in all that. Now, Joe Frazier, he did give Muhammad Ali, all in all, a tougher matchup when it came down to it just because of that type of style. But George Foreman usually, that doesn't mean that he's not going to give you a very, very tough fight. Bottom line is this, styles make fights do. But do I believe that Dillian Whyte has the type of style to beat Tyson Fury? I think maybe he can give him a tough fight, but I would not personally bet on him to beat Tyson Fury. No. It is what it is. Anyways, Dante's Boxing Nation, he's basically going to use the tactic, and he's going to be using this for a certain amount of months. He's going to claim that Tyson Fury is going to avoid Dillian Whyte. And even if Tyson Fury beats Dillian Whyte, I promise you, Dante's Boxing Nation more than likely is probably not going to give them much credit anyway, because he cannot have Tyson Fury in that same conversation overall as a Muhammad Ali, or all in all as, debatably the greatest heavyweight of all time. And I've already said this in my opinion, just kind of like with Andre Ward. There are certain people overall that would debate that Andre Ward is the greatest 168-pounder of all time. All right, even over Joe Calzaghe or Roy Jones Jr. or Bernard Hopkins, one of those guys. Although I don't know if Bernard Hopkins, I don't know if he really fought a lot at 168. I think he fought more at 160 and 175. So he was more those main two divisions. But when it comes down to it all in all, many people would debate that Andre Ward, there are certain people out there that would debate that Andre Ward is actually over Roy Jones Jr., even though I would not personally argue that. There's also certain people that would argue that Andre Ward is over Joe Calzaghe. I also would not certainly argue that, but he would be somewhere in that category with Joe Calzaghe, in my opinion, when it comes down to it. But what you find is that some of these Caucasian fighters, depending on who they are, yes, some of them can tend to be overrated. But some of the great ones overall throughout history, like Rocky Marciano, who not only was able to beat Joe Louis, even though a little bit older, but also was able to beat Ezzard Charles and Jersey Joe Walcott, the two other great black heavyweights at that time. And on top of that, he was undefeated. What many people would try to tell you was that he was this great big white hope and that all in all, he just wasn't that good. No, Rocky Marciano was a great fighter. And I've always said this, Rocky Marciano is debatably the greatest heavyweight of all time. Now, would I call him the most skilled heavyweight of all time? No, I would not. But you can't have Rocky Marciano not in that conversation just with what he's accomplished. It is what it is. He's right in that conversation with Muhammad Ali and Lennox Lewis. Some people also would include Joe Louis in that conversation. I personally would not, because he did beat a certain amount of decent fighters, but some of the more elite fighters that he fought a little bit later on, like Ezra Charles, I believe he lost to that guy. It is what it is. Joe Louis was a great fighter, but was he greater than Rocky Marciano? No, he was not. It is what it is. Tyson Fury, if he ends up being undefeated in his career, and especially if he ends up defeating an Anthony Joshua and defeating an Alexander Usyk, those two, he'll pretty much have nothing else to prove for this generation. And if he remains undefeated throughout his career, there is going to be a lot of people that discuss him in being in the same conversation with some of those other all-time great heavyweights, especially in that top A tier, with Muhammad Ali, with Rocky Marciano, with Lennox Lewis. And let me tell you what, would Tyson Fury have overall a debate in that conversation if he was able to defeat Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk? In my opinion, yes. In my opinion, yes, he would. Certain people may disagree, but it is what it is. Once again, Tyson Fury, if he ends up undefeated and if he beats Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua, he'll be right there with the both of them. It is what it is. Some people disagree, but that's how it goes. All right? But it is what it is. But Dante, he understands this, and that's the reason why he's really trying to decline overall a certain amount of the credit that Tyson Fury actually deserves. But let's get into the video. Let's see what he has to say.
I think Dillian Whyte's a sausage, to be honest. I think he's a heavy bag with legs. He's no ability, really, in boxing terms. He's got a slow jab, he's got slow feet, and he's heavy and fat, which don't really mean that much, being heavy and fat, but doesn't have any boxing ability, really. He's just tough and strong, and he tries to do his best that he can. But yeah, the heavyweights from today, they're just slugfesters, aren't they? They've got no boxing ability, and I don't mean any disrespect. They haven't got a boxing brain cell between them all. They're all looking for one punch and to do damage. They've got no feints, they've got no head movement. Dillian Whyte doesn't know what a feint is.
And now that Tyson Fury just said that, if Tyson Fury does beat Dillian Whyte, all in all, Dante is going to go back to that excuse, and he's going to say, see, even Tyson Fury said that not a lot of these heavyweights are skilled. So how can you say that he's on the same level as a Muhammad Ali who beat Sonny Liston and all these other guys? Not every fighter that, even the Hall of Famers, that Muhammad Ali fought or Lennox Lewis fought were all-time great skilled fighters, or people that always had a 100% A-plus skill set. Like I said, for example, George Foreman. George Foreman was a clear A-plus fighter. George Foreman was one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. But when you take a look at his fights, he fought like a big old bear. He never was a person all in all that, I'm not saying that he had no technique, but he was not a person overall that usually could fight a multitude of ways. He was not a person all in all that was an extremely pretty fighter to watch. He was pretty much known overall to knock you out because he had that amazing power. But if you had a very, very technical fighter in the ring with George Foreman, someone also that could compete with his size, he was going to be in trouble.
There's no boxing ability there. One decent boxer would box them up all over the place, and that's just my opinion. Because obviously I'm not.
Now, some people might bring up with Tyson Fury, they may say, well, why don't you say the same thing about Tyson Fury? Because Tyson Fury is one of those boxers all in all where we've seen him have problems in the past. Well, not only did he just defeat Deontay Wilder, who, like I said, is the George Foreman of this generation, but he also pretty much embarrassed Vladimir Klitschko. Now, Vladimir Klitschko, once again, do I think that Vladimir Klitschko is as talented as some of the other elite boxers that I've seen in the past? No, but he was way more technically sound than the Deontay Wilder. He had an excellent jab, he had an excellent left hook, he had an excellent right hand, and all in all, even though his chin was a little bit in the air, he usually knew how to protect it. Vladimir Klitschko, even though I thought that he was a part of a weaker era in the heavyweight division, he still was somewhat technically sound. So, it is what it is. And Tyson Fury, he was able to completely outpoint him. I mean, like, it wasn't even close. It was like 9 rounds to 3.
Decent boxer who can box and move, slip and slide and counter and have good feet. But Dillian Whyte, hopefully he gets his world title fight, because he has beat Elenius, he has beat Parker, he has beat who's the other guy he beat? Oh, the Australian Lucas Brown.
And of course, he beat Alexander Povetkin in his rematch, who, even though he's 40-something years old, had a very decent point in his career. This is why I always say, I had an argument with this one dude, and we were arguing about, or having a debate about who's greater between Bernard Hopkins and Joe Calzaghe. And, Bernard Hopkins was a great fighter. If you wanted to debate that his career, all in all, was greater than Joe Calzaghe, I would understand that, but in my personal opinion, I cannot rank Bernard Hopkins over Joe Calzaghe. I certainly cannot rank either of them over Roy Jones Jr., in my opinion, because he was the number one pound-for-pound fighter for so long. I think a lot of people, especially after that Antonio Tarver knockout, and I understand that Roy Jones, that a lot of his defense really was his athleticism, but still, that's like me not putting Sugar Ray Leonard overall in the top 10 of all time because I'm like, well, you know what? He eventually got knocked out by Hector Macho Camacho, and that would have never happened to some other fighters. Like, you just can't look at it that way. I'm sorry, at least that's not the way that I look at it. Roy Jones Jr., in my opinion, is a top 10 boxer of all time, no doubt about it. But when I compare Joe Calzaghe versus Bernard Hopkins, and the guy was trying to, have a debate with me, he was saying, well, who did Joe Calzaghe beat? And I said that he beat Bernard Hopkins. And he said, well, Bernard Hopkins, he was old. Well, Bernard Hopkins, yeah, he was 43 years old. But Bernard Hopkins was pretty much at the best point in his career. This is what I'm saying. You can even have certain athletes that are in their 40s, but they're still at the best point in their career. Now, I've never seen an athlete be at 50 years old and still be at the best point in their career. But certain boxers or even certain tennis players, when it comes down to it, even when they were a little bit older with age, they were still at a great point in their career. And if you're going to try to make the debate that Bernard Hopkins, he was super duper old. Yeah, he was older, but he was not completely done. Like, if you're trying to make the argument all in all that Bernard Hopkins, that, he was nowhere near the same, that's a bunch of horse shit. He lost a couple times to Jermaine Taylor because if we're really going to be real, besides Felix Tito Trinidad, that was the only other middleweight that he fought that was really worth a shit, to be honest with you, because Jermaine Taylor could handle Bernard's size, who really was almost a natural light heavyweight to begin with anyway, but it is what it is. And on top of that, when it comes down to Jermaine Taylor, in his prime, he was slick enough and good enough to mainly avoid Bernard Hopkins' tactics and able to outbox him. It was not necessarily that Bernard Hopkins was old. That's not necessarily overall why he lost to Jermaine Taylor. He lost to Jermaine Taylor because Jermaine Taylor had a style that was not very good for Bernard Hopkins. That's why he lost. But then Bernard Hopkins went up and he beat Antonio Tarver, who at the time was the Ring Magazine champion in light heavyweight. He was a very, very talented fighter. Antonio Tarver was a great fighter. And then later on, I believe he would beat Winky Wright, who was a decent fighter. Then he would face Joe Calzaghe, but I thought that he clearly lost to Joe Calzaghe 8 rounds to 4. That pretty much was when both of them were at their best, because if we're being real about Bernard Hopkins, when he ended up getting the biggest wins of his career, he usually was in his 40s. It is what it is. Like, even later on, when he went up to light heavyweight, when he was in his 40s, he beat Antonio Tarver. He also beat Kelly Pavlik after he lost to Joe Calzaghe, who was undefeated and I believe the Ring Magazine middleweight champion at the time. So don't sit here and tell me that Bernard Hopkins, he was completely done. That's a bullshit lie. It is what it is. That's why, in my opinion, all in all, Joe Calzaghe, and especially Roy Jones Jr., even Andre Ward, in my opinion, I probably would count every single one of those fighters over Bernard Hopkins. Don't get me wrong, Bernard Hopkins was a great fighter. But all in all, in terms of a skill set, I would not say that he was as skilled as any of those fighters. And on top of that, Bernard has 8 losses in his career for a reason. Now, if you want to, the Sergey Kovalev loss, okay, that's understandable because he was about 47 years old. All that's well and good. The Joe Smith Jr. fight, all that's well and good. That's understandable. But when you're talking about his losses to Jermaine Taylor or Joe Calzaghe, one of those guys, or one of his losses to Chad Dawson, that was not necessarily because of age. That was just because it was a style that Bernard Hopkins did not handle very, very well. It is what it is. So, Bernard Hopkins, great fighter. On the level of Joe Calzaghe or Roy Jones Jr. or even Andre Ward, in my opinion, no.
And he has been number 1 for a while, so it is a sin that he doesn't get a world title fight, really. He needs to get his world title shot and do his best. But we'll see. Hopefully there's some exciting fights in the future lined up.
Bitcoin, the best money we've ever had. With a different kind of money comes a different kind of card.
And I'll take care of Dillian Whyte and I'll knock him out within 6 rounds. I accept the challenge. Thank you very much. I'll fight Dillian Whyte every day of the week and twice on a Sunday, WBC.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So that right there was Tyson Fury telling the WBC and Dillian Whyte that he accepts the challenge and is willing to fight the long-time mandatory Dillian Whyte. Now, it was a little confusing, though, because at first you heard Tyson, he kept saying, you know, hopefully he gets a shot. Hopefully he gets a shot. I want to see him get a shot. I don't know what he means when he says hopefully he gets a shot, because all it really takes is for you to sign the contract, and he has the shot. I mean, when Tyson said that, it almost sounded like he was talking about Dillian Whyte fighting someone else. And by the way, so there's no...
Well, you know what Tyson Fury should tell Dillian Whyte? He should say, you know what, in order to face me, you should have to beat Deontay Wilder first. Because all in all, Dante, you know, the excuse for him, for Deontay Wilder not facing Dillian Whyte was, oh, well, you need to face Luis Ortiz before you face me. You know, even though he had fought multiple ring contenders. So, Dante, if you're going to have that same energy with Deontay Wilder, keep that same energy. Don't flip.
Fusion. When you heard the clip of Tyson Fury saying that he accepts the challenge and he will fight Dillian Whyte, that clip was something that he said over a year ago. So he has no reason to feel any different today, especially considering the fact that Dillian Whyte is his mandatory. He really has no other options available right now. He can't fight against Usyk or Joshua next, so it makes all the sense in the world for him to take on Dillian Whyte. This is a fight that Bob Arum really wants to make, surprisingly. Bob Arum, he said that he really wants to make this fight in the UK. It would be huge. 2 British fighters going up against each other for the heavyweight title. You know, it's pretty ironic because when Deontay Wilder was undefeated and he was chasing Anthony Joshua, fans kept trying to...
Allegedly chasing Anthony Joshua. So many of these guys, they always say, well, Anthony Joshua was the one avoiding Deontay Wilder. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Anthony Joshua was always super duper on his toes to take that fight, but Deontay Wilder was not always super excited to take that fight either. That's why not only he turned down that DAZN contract, but on top of that, every single time they mentioned that fight happening in England, Deontay Wilder would always bitch and moan and say, oh, well, that fight needs to happen in America. You know, and you had all these people say, well, you know, to be a great champion, you know, Dante was one of these idiots that said that as well. To be a great champion, you know, you have to go overseas and get some big wins. Really? So why does Deontay Wilder not have to go overseas and fight in England? Has Deontay Wilder ever fought one of his big fights over in England, or did he fight it in Las Vegas and in Birmingham, Alabama? Like, you know, it is what it is. Is Mayweather all of a sudden not nearly as great because all his wins came in his home country in Las Vegas? He didn't face Miguel Cotto in Puerto Rico or Madison Square Garden, and, you know, he didn't face Juan Manuel Marquez in Mexico. Like, you know, are those wins just a race now? Like, get the fuck out of here.
Say, oh yeah, you're ducking Dillian Whyte. Why don't you fight Dillian Whyte? This is what they were all saying to Deontay Wilder, knowing that Deontay Wilder wanted the Anthony Joshua fight.
No. Oh, that is a bunch of bullshit. Deontay Wilder, every time apparently it came to him coming to England, oh, all of a sudden my visa got canceled. Oh, all of a sudden, you know, this couldn't happen. Bunch of bullshit. Deontay Wilder chasing Anthony Joshua. No, he wasn't.
Which was the biggest heavyweight fight in the division, right? Now those exact same fans are calling Dillian Whyte the biggest.
By the time, all in all, you know, and this is a part of the reason also why Dante's Boxing Nation is really pushing Dillian Whyte, because he's basically saying, well, for those of you fans, you know, all in all, that really wanted Deontay Wilder to face Dillian Whyte, you should keep the same energy. And I get his point when it comes down to it. But Tyson Fury does have a couple more options. The problem with Deontay Wilder always was this. Deontay Wilder, you know, allegedly was being avoided by every single fighter out there when it comes down to it. Dillian Whyte called him out multiple times. Now, I get that Dillian Whyte maybe could have fought Luis Ortiz all in all, but why couldn't you fight Dillian Whyte immediately? I mean, it is what it is. You didn't, you know, it was not confirmed that a Tyson Fury rematch had happened yet. And the Anthony Joshua fight, they were pretty much busy with the rematch with Andy Ruiz. So, you know, you could have fought Dillian Whyte, but you didn't want to. It is what it is.
Ever in the sport of boxing, because once again, he may possibly be going up against Tyson Fury. I think this is a 50-50 fight. And if Tyson...
Well, it's not a 50-50 fight. But Dante says that because he doesn't know anything about boxing. Once again, would I be shell shocked that Dillian Whyte defeated Tyson Fury? No, but I don't see Dillian Whyte defeating Tyson Fury.
Tyson Fury comes in as heavy as he did against Deontay Wilder, he gives Dillian Whyte a much bigger chance of winning this fight. Tyson's best chance of winning this fight would be to lose all of that weight and get back on his toes, sticking and moving like he normally does.
I'm not so sure about that. We'll see. But Tyson Fury, one good thing about him is that he can fight very well on the inside. He can fight very well on the outside. He's a little bit different from Anthony Joshua because Anthony Joshua, he can fight a little bit going forward and going backward, but he's much better at both than Anthony Joshua. Like when he needed to go on the inside against Steve Cunningham, those smaller guys sometimes can give Tyson Fury problems, but what you notice actually is that the more that he pressures them, the more problems they tend to have with him. Because that's a lot of weight behind those punches. He has decent power when it comes down to it. And on top of that, Tyson Fury, he can fight on the inside very, very well. So he may just come at Dillian Whyte again. We'll have to see what happens. I don't know if he is going to lose all that weight. In my opinion, a good weight for Tyson Fury. I think all in all that, being around really whatever weight that he chooses. He could be 250, he could be at 270.
And don't worry, Tyson, you're not black, so you don't have to worry about them calling you boring for doing what you've been doing your whole career. That's what that Hope insurance is for. It covers everything when you got the card.
Well, I agree a little bit all in all that, once again, like I said, certain black fighters, they are called boring compared to other demographics. But,
So yeah, for Tyson to have his best chance to win this fight, he would have to go back to moving and boxing and be light on his toes. Tyson.
We'll see about that. Like I said, I could see Tyson Fury easily pressuring Dillian Whyte as well. Because Dillian Whyte, he is vulnerable to get jabbed when it comes down to it. I would not necessarily say that he has an A-grade chin. Sometimes he does leave himself open for punches. But I could see where Dante's coming from. I can see where Tyson Fury does box on the back foot and be on his toes. So we'll see what happens. I could see either or.
Fury, he looked extremely beatable in the fight against Deontay Wilder. He was sloppy, he lacked defense, and a lot of people try to defend him by saying, oh, he just wanted to fight that way because he was angry, etc., etc.
Well, what I'll say is this. Tyson Fury certainly did not look in his best form in that Deontay Wilder fight. I'm not going to necessarily say that he lacked defense because if you lack defense, then Deontay Wilder is going to knock you out. I understand that Deontay Wilder, he's not the most complete fighter, but he's a dude that has an 83-inch reach, and on top of that, has a right hand that can knock out a moose, like I always say. If you don't have any defense, or if you don't have great defense, like a Luis Ortiz, then you're going to get knocked out. That's the bottom line. But Fury certainly could have been better with his head movement. He could have used his feet a little bit more, I think. And on top of that, I don't think he took Wilder. I'm not going to say that he didn't take his power seriously, but I think all in all that he thought that that Wilder was pretty much done after that third round. He even said that after the fight. And I think that he thought that Wilder was not going to have the same amount of power anymore after that third round. And he thought wrong. It is what it is. Tyson Fury still looked good in that fight, but he didn't look as good as he could have. Because that second fight, he was damn near perfect.
Really wanted to beat this guy at his own game because it was so personal. But when Tommy Hearns fought Marvin Hagler, it was extremely personal, and you still seen technique, right?
Well, why are you acting like we didn't see technique from Tyson Fury? I hate to tell people this, and a lot of people are going to disagree with me. Tyson Fury is a better all-around fighter, or at least what I'll say is this. He's a greater fighter than Tommy Hearns was. Has a way better chin when it comes down to it. Won the big fights in his career. Tommy Hearns, when it comes down to it, no offense against Tommy Hearns. Tommy Hearns was a great fighter. He's actually been a little bit overrated throughout his career. The biggest win that he has in his career is over Roberto Duran. And that's a great win. But you outsize Roberto Duran by so much. I mean, when it comes down to it, you're supposed to win that fight. I know a certain amount of people all know, they may disagree with me there. But Tommy Hearns for a welterweight, like that dude had a 78-inch reach. That's unheard of for a welterweight. On top of that, the dude was 6'3" and had excellent power. So it's I'm sorry, but you're supposed to win that fight. But the other fights that you were supposed to win, or the other fights overall that you had, like against Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler, you didn't win. And you even lost a couple of other decently big fights in your career. So Tommy Hearns, he's a great fighter. But he's kind of on that Bernard Hopkins level. Great fighter, but not within my top 10 or top 20.
Ali was fighting against Frazier It was personal. It was a war. We seen technique. And
Yes,
this is why it's so ironic.
and you seen Ali get, get roughed around in all three of those fights. Look at the first fight. Muhammad Ali, when it came down to it, he got knocked down. So, it is what it is.
Ironic that Tyson Fury was talking about the heavyweights that lack skill, that lack technique. Tyson Fury, he definitely has some skill, and he definitely has way more skill than...
He has a lot of skill, but you're not going to admit that because, once again, you can't compare Tyson Fury all in all to some of those other all-time great heavyweights. Dante knows what's coming. Like I said, he knows what's coming. If Tyson Fury, if he defeats Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk, he's going to be in that conversation as the greatest heavyweight ever. Now, whether you want to put him there or not, that's your business. But when it comes down to it all in all, there is going to be a certain amount of people that are going to debate that. And he knows that's coming. And Tyson Fury will have that argument of being undefeated. So it is what it is. Now, being undefeated isn't everything. But Tyson Fury has some great wins in his career. He's already been able to defeat Deontay Wilder and Vladimir Klitschko. And if he's able to defeat Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk, that'll mean that he has defeated every A-class skilled fighter of his career that he needed to. So it is what it is, at least the elite champions.
Deontay Wilder. But after all, almost everyone that Deontay Wilder fought had more skill. Once again, Wilder just made up for the...
Well, right, but Joe Frazier, when we talk about him versus George Foreman, Joe Frazier was more skilled than George Foreman. That's why he was able to beat Muhammad Ali once, but, George Foreman was never able to beat Muhammad Ali. Does that mean that Joe Frazier was automatically greater than George Foreman? Take a look. Joe Frazier was not able to beat George Foreman. So you can have better skills, but sometimes that power, especially in the heavyweight division, it's a great X factor. George Foreman had that same X factor. Deontay Wilder, this is why I call him the George Foreman of the 2010s. That's what he is.
Lack of skill with his willpower to win in that right hand. Whenever I say that this is a 50-50 fight, if they even fight, and how this is a very, very dangerous fight for Tyson Fury, every time I say that, it really, really pisses off the race fans because they don't want to hear logic.
I love when Dante talks about race fans and talks about logic as if all in all that he's not some, massive racist himself, or as if all in all that he's a logical and objective person. Of course, every fight that Tyson Fury could have in the heavyweight division, it could be a tough fight because there are some very talented heavyweights there. I'm not necessarily going to say that they're on the same skill level as, like, say, an Evander Holyfield or, a Lennox Lewis back in the day. But when it comes down to it all in all, there's some very decently, tough heavyweights. You got Joe Joyce, you got Joseph Parker, you got Dillian Whyte, you got Oscar Rivas, you got Alexander Povetkin that's still in the mix, Andy Ruiz, and those guys aren't even the A-class fighters, Then you got Anthony Joshua and, Alexander Usyk. That's a very talented heavyweight division. Now, once again, do all of them have faults? Yeah, of course. But when it comes down to it all in all, Tyson Fury, in my opinion, out of any other heavyweight fighter today, besides maybe Alexander Usyk, and Tyson Fury, his size, I think, is just going to be a little bit too big for Usyk. We'll see what happens. But when it comes down to it all in all, Tyson Fury, in my opinion, probably the most complete heavyweight fighter today.
They don't want an analytical breakdown, especially if it does not completely favor Tyson Fury.
Well, what is your analytical breakdown? Tyson Fury had trouble with Deontay Wilder, so he's going to have problems with Dillian Whyte. I mean, that's not necessarily that intelligent of a breakdown. That's like me saying all in all, you know what? Manny Pacquiao, he didn't really have that much problems with Miguel Cotto. He knocked him out. And Mayweather, he had so many problems with Miguel Cotto. So all in all, I think that Manny Pacquiao, I think he's going to knock out Floyd Mayweather. Or I think he's going to beat him easily. That's called fight math. And that's something that if you know anything about the fight game or if you know anything overall about boxing, you don't do that because you know that styles make fights. Dillian Whyte, all in all, is he a more complete fighter than Deontay Wilder? Sure he is. But Dillian Whyte also was not a dude that has an 83-inch reach and a guy that has that excellent right hand. Don't get me wrong. He has good power. But all in all, he also is vulnerable to getting hurt by by Tyson Fury. So we'll see what happens.
I want you to say Dillian Whyte is complete trash. He has no chance against Tyson Fury. But they don't mind if I were to say.
I don't think, all in all, that Dillian Whyte has ever been complete trash. You seem to overall pretty much, all in all, push that narrative, all in all, when you like Deontay Wilder. But now that, you finally realize reality and you got a big slap from it when it comes down to it, now you realize that your boy is never going to defeat him. Now you're really hoping, all in all, that another fighter is going to defeat him. And you're hoping and praying that it's not going to be Alexander Usyk. Because once again, both heavyweight champions right now are Caucasian. Once again, this had to be the worst possible outcome for Dante's Boxing Nation and all these other pro-black cult members. But it is what it is.
Hey, Usyk has a chance of beating Tyson. We know what time it is. Let me just ask everyone this question right now.
Well, Usyk is a better fighter, all in all, than Dillian Whyte. As you've seen, he just defeated Anthony Joshua. There's no offense against Dillian Whyte. I think that he's a great fighter. But he's not the fighter that Alexander Usyk is. Alexander Usyk has better head movement. He has a better chin. He's faster than Dillian Whyte. Of course, I don't think that he has the power that Dillian Whyte has. But all in all, Alexander Usyk, is he a more complete fighter than Dillian Whyte? Yes, he is.
Assuming that these guys fight, do you guys believe that Dillian Whyte will perform better than Deontay Wilder did? In terms of skill and technique, would you say that Dillian Whyte is better in that compartment?
You would say, all in all, that he's more skilled in certain compartments. But when it comes down to it, that does not mean that Dillian Whyte is a greater fighter than Deontay Wilder, or that, all in all, that he's going to give more of a problem to Tyson Fury, all in all, than what Deontay Wilder did. Once again, yeah, sure, of course. Like I said, all in all, Dillian Whyte, you can argue that he's more complete in certain areas. But like I said, this is how you know Dante's an idiot. He don't really know that much about boxing because, once again, that's fight math. You don't compare it that way. Once again, Deontay Wilder, he's a dude, all in all, that has an 83-inch reach and is a guy that has an excellent right hand. Now Tyson Fury, he's always usually been able to compete with those guys very, very well. The guys that have around his own same height and reach, probably out of any other heavyweight that I've seen today. But when it comes down to it, all in all, does that mean that 100% that Dillian Whyte is gonna give him a less hard of a fight? No. But does that also mean that Dillian Whyte, all in all, is going to completely rough him up a hell of a lot more? No, it does not. You have to take a look at the individual. You have to say, okay, what does this guy bring to the table that the other guy maybe doesn't? Now, of course, Dillian Whyte, like I said, he may be more complete in certain departments, but he also isn't a dude that has an 83-inch reach and has that excellent right hand. That's one of the most powerful punches in history, all in all, like Deontay Wilder. So we'll see what happens.
And if you know anything about boxing, your answer would be yes and yes, right?
Dante, you have no right to educate anyone on boxing because you don't know anything about boxing. That's why, like an idiot, you keep commentating on this alleged long count because you don't even know the simple rule of when a person leaves a neutral corner that the count has to stop. Dante and the rest of these boys, most of them don't know anything about boxing.
So if we know that he will do better than Deontay Wilder did, that alone means it's going to be a hell of a fight and a hard fight.
Right, but how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that for sure? Juan Manuel Marquez versus Manny Pacquiao, or let's say Miguel Cotto versus Manny Pacquiao. I would say that Manny Pacquiao all around is a greater fighter than Miguel Cotto. But there are certain areas where I would say that Miguel Cotto is actually even the better boxer than a Floyd Mayweather Jr. Once again, Manny Pacquiao beat the shit out of Miguel Cotto, and Cotto gave Mayweather a very tough fight. Does that mean, all in all, that based off of that performance, that we know that Manny Pacquiao is going to hurt Floyd Mayweather, or that he's going to do better?
For Tyson Fury to win, because we've seen what Deontay Wilder was able to do in the condition that he was in from the third round on.
Deontay Wilder tried to adjust, and he pretty much was the best version of himself. The only thing that was the problem is that he gained that 10 extra pounds of muscle. So that tired him out at about the 7th round.
This man, Deontay Wilder, was staggering all.
But what I will say, all in all, is this. Tyson Fury, he is going to have to perform better in the future than what he did in this match. He was not bad. I would give him about a B+. But, these guys coming forward, they are going to be looking to take his head off. So he is going to have to be careful.
Around the ring the whole night. I mean, it was like almost animated the way his legs would cross when Tyson would throw a punch and hit him.
Because he doesn't have good feet. But it is what it is. These guys try to lie to you and say that Deontay Wilder, or maybe they're not lying, maybe they're just stupid and they're really not overly intelligent. We can all tell that. But when it comes down to the overall, like I said, these guys, they try to say, oh, Deontay, he was out on his feet the whole entire time. It's not that he was out on his feet. It's just that he doesn't have good feet. It is what it is.
And Deontay Wilder's legs would literally cross while he's still standing. It's amazing that the fight went all the way to 11 rounds. It's amazing that it was still life and death for Tyson Fury.
Life and death all in all. I think that it was life and death overall for that fourth round. But besides that fourth round and the first round, every other round was won by Tyson Fury. I don't think most people really realize the definition of a life and death fight. A life and death fight is what Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward was. That's what a life and death fight was. Don't get me wrong, Tyson Fury had his own problems, but that's not what I would call a life and death fight. All right? It is what it is. Like I said, I thought that was Wilder had his moments, but that was not a life and death fight. Like I said, I was talking to this dude yesterday on this boxing poll, and he was trying to tell me, how can you rank Joe Calzaghe above Bernard Hopkins when, Hopkins was 43 years old and Joe Calzaghe went life and death with him. Joe Calzaghe didn't go life and death with Bernard Hopkins. Don't get me wrong, he had a tough fight, but he didn't go life and death with Bernard Hopkins. He won the fight 8 rounds to 4. Go ahead, watch it. If you know how to score a fight, that was a clear 8 rounds to 4 fight. The only one that scored that fight for Hopkins was that dumb broad Adelaide Bird, and she shouldn't even be allowed to score in our boxing fight again. So it is what it is.
This is the reason why Dillian Whyte is going to be much more of a problem. Now, understand this, because I had someone in the comment section in my last video say, oh man, now you're trying to say Dillian Whyte is better than Deontay Wilder? These are ignorant decafs that don't understand boxing. Stop.
You're an ignorant decaf as well. You ain't really smart overall, Dante, really, to be quite honest with you. But it is what it is anyway, But, some people are asking that question because you had a very different energy when it came down to it before.
Styles make fights, right?
Styles do make fights. I agree with that. Do I personally think that Dillian Whyte will beat Tyson Fury? No, I do not. Can he give him a tough fight? He certainly can. But I'm going to predict Tyson Fury to beat Dillian Whyte.
Shane Mosley, he couldn't beat Miguel Cotto. But Margarito knocks out Miguel Cotto, and Shane Mosley, he knocked out Margarito.
Very true.
Styles make fights. When it comes to...
Although I will say that Antonio Margarito, I think, was using them special hand wraps in that Miguel Cotto fight. And, of course, he got caught in that Shane Mosley fight. There's also this big myth that goes around that say, oh, well, Antonio Margarito, he got caught in the Miguel Cotto fight. Actually, he didn't get caught in the Miguel Cotto fight. He got caught in the Shane Mosley fight. That's the first time he got caught.
Deontay Wilder. At least the Deontay Wilder before he suffered all that damage in the second fight against Tyson Fury when Tyson...
Oh, you hear that? You hear that? What have I been saying all in all that Dante overall was going to use as an excuse? We don't know if Deontay Wilder is ever the same after that second match. That's basically all he's going to say. Like I said, he's never going to give Tyson Fury credit. Tyson Fury could retire 50-0 and have 20 title defenses. He don't care. It is what it is. But, like I said, that's not really up to him to judge Tyson Fury's greatness. It is what it is, because he obviously is not a logical and objective commentator. So what he says in the long run anyway really isn't going to matter.
Cheated. That version of Deontay Wilder before the second fight, he probably would have beat Dillian Whyte. But now in the condition that Deontay Wilder is in, I don't know who he beats. I truly believe that dent that was put in his head, all the damage he received in...
Yes, that dent that was never medically proven.
That second fight, he's no longer the same. That's at least what I've seen in that third fight.
Well, then you don't know what you're talking about. If Deontay Wilder was not the same or nowhere near to what he was, why did he last 11 rounds? You can't claim that it was Tyson Fury's pillow hands, because all in all, Tyson Fury, he was able to hurt him from early on, and he was able to beat the shit out of him and stun him so many times.
So with that being said, I'm looking forward to this fight. This should be a really, really good fight. And I keep telling you guys...
Because let me take this for example. Now, every fighter is different. But take this for example. Miguel Cotto, when he first lost to Antonio Margarito, basically got pummeled. He got jackhammered. Well, I'm not saying that he lost the fight completely overall. Of course, he lost the fight. The first 6 rounds went to Miguel Cotto, but he tired himself out. And not only that, Antonio Margarito was using them special hand wraps. But in the rematch, it looked completely different. Because, sure, Margarito, he still has decent punching power, even without the hand wraps. But obviously, without them special hand wraps, Antonio Margarito had nowhere near the same amount of power. And everyone always says, that, oh, Antonio Margarito, had he not had that broken eye socket, all that bullshit, that he would have beat Miguel Cotto in the rematch because Miguel Cotto was starting to tire out. No, he wasn't. Anyone who says that doesn't know shit about boxing, because they were in the 10th round. By the time that Miguel Cotto overall tired out in the first fight, when it came down to it, he was already starting to get majorly bloody when it came down to it. And you could tell that he was going to go down sooner or later. And I believe that he went down, first of all, in the 10th round. Miguel Cotto, you could tell that his stamina was decent, and he was nowhere near as damaged as he was in the first fight. All right? People always say, oh, well, Antonio Margarito was never the same after the Manny Pacquiao fight. You know who also suffered a loss to Manny Pacquiao before that Antonio Margarito rematch? Miguel Cotto. He got the shit kicked out of him in that fight. Look at that fight. All right? But somehow Miguel Cotto, he was able to recover decently in that fight, and somehow he didn't get knocked down in that second fight. That's interesting.
Guys, I will be more impressed with Tyson Fury.
And you know how else you know that? Because Miguel Cotto, I don't remember him losing a single round in that fight, to be honest with you. Maybe one round Antonio caught on, but the second half of the fight looked completely different from the first, second half of the fight. The first fight of the second half.
Beating Dillian Whyte as opposed to beating Deontay Wilder. Don't get me wrong, just because of the fact that Deontay Wilder was the undefeated champion, he was the man that was chasing Anthony Joshua, it's still really impressive.
No, he wasn't.
Impressive that Tyson Fury, he beat him. But at the same time,
let me discredit Tyson Fury, because I can't have Tyson Fury in those conversations, in those all-time great conversations. And I'm very, very depressed right now because my pro-black hero, Deontay Wilder, ended up getting defeated.
He has not beat a complete fighter yet. Complete fighter, it means someone who uses all of their tools, right? And Dillian Whyte is one of those fighters. So let's see if the fight happens. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out, guys.
Anyways, that's really about it for today. But I just thought that I would do that video because, like I said, the excuses are coming in. And they're going to be alleging, if Tyson Fury does not want to take the Dillian Whyte fight, that he is avoiding a Dillian Whyte. So it is what it is. Anyways, we'll see what happens. Anyways, I'll talk to you all later. We'll see what happens with this.